Today we begin a multi-day conversation about a farmer who became a warrior, turned down an offer to be a king, and is a member of the Bible Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11.
Through the story of Gideon's life, we're going to learn how God expands and uses what we already have, and he always finds a way to overcome what we perceive maybe as our weaknesses when we choose to follow him with enthusiasm and resourcefulness. So that's what's next on HC Daily.
You're listening to another episode of HC Daily, a daily devotional podcast that you can listen to at home or on the go. We believe that you can grow as much as you want to grow spiritually, and this podcast can be a part of your daily growth plan. So, whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or your favorite podcast app, we're glad you're here. Now, let's join our hosts, Jeff Forester and Chris Zarbaugh, in the studio.
So, Chris.
Yes, sir.
I have a burning question.
I'm sure you do.
Yes, I do. So, you're a superheroes guy?
Oh, of course.
Okay, DC or Marvel?
Always Marvel.
Always Marvel. Okay, well, so here's my question. This is really important. I think it's divided good people for many, many years. Superman or Batman?
For DC?
Just in general.
Yeah, well, it's always Superman.
Always Superman.
Yeah,
Why?
I thought that. Can I just commentate and say?
Go ahead.
I thought that the concept of Superman versus Batman as a movie was a joke.
Okay.
Of course, we all know that the movie sort of was a joke, right?
Right.
But just, I'm not talking about the movie because I could complain about that all day long.
But the characters.
It's a joke. Superman, all he would have had to have done is like go into outer space and then just stay away from Batman and then just zap him from space with his heat vision and Batman would be obliterated.
There you go.
It's just incredibly unfair.
So you don't feel like it's a competition at all? What about cool factor, though?
It's not.
What about cool factor? Which one's cooler?
I'm still going to go with Superman.
Still going to go with Batman or Superman.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I lean towards Batman.
I like Batman.
Yeah.
I like him. I just don't think he's legit.
All right. Well, we'll have to find a Marvel conversation later. The reason why I asked that is because we're in the book of Judges, and these guys are kind of like the superheroes of the Bible, right?
For sure.
The circumstances they find themselves in. And we're kicking off today a guy named Gideon.
Yes.
And Gideon, of all of them, is like the least superhero-ish guy, right? He's just this normal guy. He's a little intimidated. He's timid, nervous. But we're going to pick up in Judges chapter 6. We're going to look at looking at the life of Gideon.
Yeah, I would compare him to Ant-Man.
Ant-Man.
Very, very unassuming Gideon is.
Yeah. And not even sure he really wants a job, to be honest with you. But hey, now that I'm here. Okay, so we're going to look at Judges chapter 6, and we're going to read a big chunk of this, maybe the whole chapter, I guess. And it says this. I'm reading from the New Living Translation. Verse 1, it says, "The Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. So the Lord handed them over to the Midianites for 7 years. The Midianites were so cruel that the Israelites made hiding places for themselves in the mountains, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, marauders from Midian, Amalek, and the people of the east would attack Israel, camping in the land and destroying crops as far away as Gaza. They left the Israelites with nothing to eat, taking all the sheep, goats, cattle, and donkeys. These enemy hordes, coming with their livestock and tents, were as thick as locusts. They arrived on droves of camels, too numerous to count, and they stayed until the land was stripped bare. So Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. When they cried out to the Lord because of Midian, the Lord sent a prophet to the Israelites, and he said, 'This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of slavery in Egypt. I rescued you from the Egyptians and from all who oppressed you. I drove out your enemies and gave you their land. I told you, I am the Lord your God. You must not worship the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you now live. But you have not listened to me.' Then the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, 'Mighty hero, the Lord is with you.' 'Sir,' Gideon replied, 'if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites.' Then the Lord turned to him and said, 'Go with the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I'm sending you.' 'But Lord,' the Gideon said, 'how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I'm the least in my entire family.' The Lord said to him, 'I'll be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man." And Gideon replied, "If you're truly going to help me, show me a sign to prove it. It's really the Lord speaking to me. Don't go away until I come back and bring my offering to you." And he answered, "I will stay here until you return." So Gideon returned home, and he cooked a young goat, and with a basket of flour he baked some bread without yeast. And then carrying the meat in a basket and the broth in a pot, he brought them out and presented them to the angel who was under the great tree. The angel of God said to him, "Place the meat and the unleavened bread on this rock and pour the broth over it." And Gideon did as he was told. Then the angel of the Lord touched the meat and bread with the tip of the staff in his hand, and fire flamed up from the rock and consumed all he had brought, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he cried out, "O sovereign Lord, I'm doomed. I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." "It's all right," the Lord replied. "Do not be afraid. You will not die." And Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and named it Yahweh Shalom, which means the Lord is peace. The altar remains in Ophrah in the land of the clan of Abiezer to this day. That night the Lord said to Gideon, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old, and pull down your father's altar to Baal, and cut down the Asherah pole standing beside it. Then build an altar to the Lord your God here on this hilltop sanctuary, laying the stones carefully. Sacrifice the bull as a burnt offering on the altar, using as fuel the wood of the Asherah pole you cut down." So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord had commanded, but he did it at night because he was afraid of the other members of his father's household and of the people of the town. Early the next morning, as the people of the town began to stir, someone discovered that the altar of Baal had been broken down and that the Asherah pole beside it had been cut down. In their place, a new altar had been built, and on it were the remains of the bull that had been sacrificed. The people said to each other, "Who did this?" And after asking around and making a careful search, they learned it was Gideon, the son of Joash. "Bring out your son," the men of the town demanded of Joash. "He must die for destroying the altar of Baal and for cutting down the Asherah pole." But Joash shouted to the mob and confronted them. "Why are you defending Baal? Will you argue his case? Whoever pleads his case will be put to death by morning. If Baal truly is God, let him defend himself and destroy the one who broke down his altar." From then on, Gideon was called Jerubbaal, which means "let Baal defend himself," because he broke down Baal's altar. Well, you can imagine, so Gideon turns out to be, he's the 5th judge of Israel, but you can see even here, the angel of the Lord shows up to talk to him, and he argues with him like 3 times. "Dude, I don't even believe that you're really an angel. I'm not sure that I'm the one called. God has abandoned us," and all this kind of stuff. And I think you just really see the brokenness and the struggle that the people of Israel are having at that time, because you can imagine working all year long, you're planting your crops, you're maintaining them, you're cultivating the land in order to produce a bountiful harvest, and then every single year, these people come swooping in like locusts, and they just destroy and consume everything.
For like 7 years in a row.
For 7 years in a row, every single year. And so the Israelites are feeling oppressed. They're feeling forgotten by God. And Gideon is hiding, trying to just make a little bit of food for his family.
Yeah, and he's hiding in a wine press in beneath the ground.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because if you go to Israel, it's hard for people to imagine, but it's not like a traditional basement like we would have here in North America. They had caves, and sometimes they would even carve into the ground and I guess make a man-made cave. But surprisingly, it's very cool down there and very well ventilated. So it's actually good. But the problem is that he was dealing with wheat. Right. And when you deal with wheat, you get dust and chaff and things that are flying everywhere. Plus, you need an open area because when you separate the wheat from the chaff, you have to throw it up.
Right.
And the heavier parts land down, and then all the chaff blows away in the wind.
Yeah.
And so by doing this in a confined space, in a cave underneath the ground, that he has to be hurting and suffering to do this.
Absolutely. Well, for the non-farmers among us, what we think of as wheat is the kernel inside of the head of wheat, right? So at the top, there's all these little kernels, and it's surrounded or encapsulated in chaff. So that chaff is useless. There's not much. There's no nutritional benefit whatsoever. So you have to be able to separate the chaff from the wheat. And when they're winnowing it or whatever, they'd be tossing it up in the air after it's all been cracked to get the breeze to blow away the chaff. So that all you'd have is the heavier wheat. That's what you're doing. So for him to be down in a wine press where there's no breeze.
Right.
This guy's just trying to do a futile job. It's so difficult. It's not working, but he's doing it in order to he's fairly innovative.
Yeah.
He's being secret. Certainly, the Midianites would have never thought to go look in a wine press for extra food.
Right.
And that's what he's doing. It's pretty clever.
Yeah, well, it gives us a little insight about how clever he is, which is going to come and serve him later because, Gideon already has demonstrated himself as very resourceful, somebody who is finding a way to do things. And I also related, when I first read this when I was a teenager, I related because I'm the youngest of 5 boys. And my brothers were very big in their reputation. Not necessarily my middle brother but my first 2 brothers were very, very larger than life. Mm-hmm. And so, when Gideon says, I'm the youngest in my clan, or I'm the youngest in my family, and my family's the least in the whole clan. Well, I mean, I don't know if I can relate to that part, but I definitely felt like he was expressing insecurities.
Oh, sure.
That I actually went to church and I was hooked. Because when I walked in through the doors at 14 years of age, I remember the youth pastor was doing a series and he had promoted it on the door. There was like some big, advertisement that he made out of marker. And the series was called, If God Loves Me, Then Why Don't I Like Myself? And it was on Gideon. So this this is what hooked me.
Yeah, what a good title for Gideon's life.
Yeah. And so it was strange because I always thought I liked myself. I was sort of popular. I was sort of an athlete and all these different things. We were very, very poor, which I tried to hide, in a lot of ways. But I think that for the most part, when Gideon says, I think you have the wrong guy, I resonate. I think a lot of us do.
Yeah. So this story is so interesting. Some of the background of the story is really interesting. So you've got these Midianites that are teaming up with some of the other marauders and raiders in the area. So who are they, and why are they so obsessed with Israel? Well, you have to remember that the Israel, God called it the Promised Land. The people thought of it as the Promised Land. It was described as a land flowing with milk and honey. The ability to grow food and to produce everything necessary for life was fantastic. The Midianites are descendants from the 6 sons of Abraham, from Abraham's second wife, right? So Sarah had died, and he remarried. He married this woman named Keturah, and he winds up having 6 sons, and they wind up developing into these tribes that lived mostly between the Dead Sea and the Red Sea. So really what you're talking about is in the Sinai Peninsula, which is one of the most desolate, wildest places on the planet, even to this day. It's very difficult to eke out a living in that area. So they would go up, raid the land of milk and honey, just strip it bare, and then take everything home, right? Because they were powerful. So these are like pirates almost. That's kind of the way they were, only they were like land pirates. So they didn't live there. They had no care for the people of Israel. They just abused them, and God used them to bring correction to the fact that Israel had rebelled against God. So you have the Israelites knowing that they're God's chosen people. They're supposed to be living in the land of milk and honey, all the provisions of God, and yet they're not benefiting from it at all. And oftentimes I think when we have been living in sin, or we've been struggling with not honoring God with our life, there's a certain amount of frustration, knowing what should be versus what is. And we have this understanding there should be more to my life than this. I think this is kind of what you're getting from Gideon. So not only does he feel small, but he knows there should be more. Yeah. And he's frustrated he's blaming God for the circumstances that Israel finds themselves in.
And there's no doubt that those are some pretty tough circumstances to deal with.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Yeah, so he's been sort of probably thinks he has been dealt a tough deck, and a lot of us have a hand. Gosh, man, it was hard for me to get out. I was trying to say dealt a tough hand. There you go.
There you go.
But let's just talk about the fact that he not only does he have these objections, and he wonders if the angel has chosen the right guy, but at the same time, even though that the angel says, you'll defeat them as if you're only fighting one man. First of all, isn't that great?
Yeah, that's such a cool descriptor.
That's a great descriptor. And of course, they're a huge army.
Right.
135,000 is what we're about to find out.
Yeah.
So anyway, but then what does Gideon do? Gideon says, can you at least prove to me that you're from the Lord?
Yeah, this angel shows up and he doesn't believe it's an angel. Yeah.
Well, because I'm such a movie guy, I try to visualize, I'm sure a lot of us do, what this must have been like. So when he runs home, and he makes an offering, right? And he gets broth and meat and everything else. and he brings it to the Lord, or the angel of the Lord. He says, set it down, pour the broth over it, and he says he touches it with his staff, and it consumes, and then it goes away. In other words, God is receiving the offering, and then the angel just disappears.
Right.
And I'm trying to visualize that, with the touch of a staff, and it just goes up. I picture
it's like Gandalf.
What?
Yeah.
I guess
staff.
Gandalf. Yeah,
right.
My mind didn't go there.
This mysterious traveler.
But yeah, Gandalf sort of looks that way, doesn't he? But anyway, I was thinking like a blue flame, and I was thinking of some sort of like a zap, go away kind of a thing. I just can't even imagine.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he says, "I am undone." He says, "I'm doomed."
Well, they believed that they would die. So their belief was that if anybody ever saw God, they would die.
Yeah.
And so he's pretty convinced now he saw God, which may have been true. Right? So the Bible calls him the angel of the Lord. Many times the angel of the Lord is Jesus, right? So this could have been a theophany because the angel does not say, God is sending you. He says, I am sending you. And then a couple verses later, he says, I will be with you. So this may have been Jesus. This may have been a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus in his life. And so it is kind of funny that he's talking to God, complaining about God, right?
Right.
So he says, I'm really, I doubt God's concern for us. Where's he at? Where's all these miracles everybody talks about? And then he's questioning God's wisdom. How can I rescue Israel, right? Because that's what he tells him. You're going to be the one that rescues Israel. He says, what? Who would pick me to rescue Israel? And I think he's missing the fact that when he's frustrated with God, he's missing the fact that Israel had brought these issues on themselves, and that God only allowed them to happen to wake them up to realize that they needed God.
Hey, you said something there that stuck with me. I haven't gotten past it. The phrase that you said, he's talking to God, complaining about God. And I think to myself, isn't it interesting how God didn't condemn him for that in the moment?
Not at all.
And so I think that for us
I think he's
today,
incredibly patient with him in this conversation.
Patient with Gideon.
With Gideon, because he just keeps arguing with him, and he's just, the angel of the Lord's just sticking with him.
And it demonstrates to us that God is not afraid of our complaining, right? I mean, we're supposed to, a lot of times I will say at funerals, especially if somebody dies young, or, that phrase I was trying to get out, being dealt a tough hand, right? And sometimes we really go through, the ringer. And I say, hey, I know that there are people in this room who are angry at God. They doubt his existence. They question his goodness.
Yeah.
And I always try to say, God is not afraid of your anger.
Right.
He's not afraid of your questions. He is not afraid. Just bring those things to him. And this is a great thing for us to take note of. The fact that Gideon was possibly looking at Jesus himself, complaining about God.
Right.
And then the angel doesn't condemn. So I think it's just yet another great example for us to go to God and just bring all of our concerns and all of our complaints.
That was your timer telling you to quit talking. That was what that was.
Thanks, Jeff.
So I think sometimes we feel like we've been dealt a bad hand, and maybe you have. Sometimes we blame our circumstances on God or on other people. And what you find here with Israel is never during the book of Judges do you find them actually repenting of sin. So we know what the cause is, right? We just read what the cause was for this. The cause was that they had rebelled against God again. And so the consequence came. And instead of them doing this deep search in their own hearts, they just go to God and say, oh, we're sorry. Right, we don't like our current circumstances, and I think sometimes, even as Christians, we often confuse remorse for repentance. And what God's really looking for is repentance. Repentance is changing our minds. Remorse is just, gee, I wish that didn't happen. And I think a lot of times we do get to the point where we wish it didn't happen, but we're not actually changing our minds and saying the direction I was going was wrong, and now God, I'm going to turn your way. And so then because of that, it's so easy to we're only remorseful, not actually repentant. It's really easy for us to slip back into the same sin. I think this is why you see this same cycle. It happens. There's high and low 6 times throughout this book, because the people, I think, really found themselves in a victim mindset rather than realizing I'm the cause of my own problems and going to God and repenting.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I mean, we see that at the end of this, of the end of this reading that we did, is that there's a difference between saying geez, these Asherah poles or Asherah poles, whatever you want to pronounce it, and this altar to Baal, these are wrong, and we really should build an altar to God.
Right.
There's a difference between thinking that should happen and actually doing it.
Right.
Because he ends up doing it at nighttime.
Right.
And probably wise. Again, it's probably wise of him.
Yeah.
Because at nighttime, it could have been done to its completion without interruption.
Yeah.
So it might not have been that he was, fearful that he was going to get. Well, it's probably all the above. But I like the fact that he did it at night because that way it's done.
Yeah.
And then he knows he's going to face the consequences in the morning.
Well, the consequences could be devastating.
Oh,
they could kill him for it.
Well, they wanted to.
Yeah.
It says they wanted to put it. They said, "Bring your son out. He's going to die."
Yeah.
Because of what he's done. And, and so I just love the fact that, again, to your point, that there's a difference in wanting to do something and then actually doing it. And so Gideon then trusts the Lord.
Yeah.
And he says, okay, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to do this.
And he acted immediately.
Yeah.
So the angel of the Lord has said, you're going to deliver all of Israel, but tonight what I want you to do is just go tear down that one altar.
Right.
Right. And so you may not know the whole extent of everything God's going to have you do in your life, but he's just inviting you to do the next thing. What's the next thing? And that's precisely what he does here.
Well, it's a perfect picture for us. He wants us to do great things, and it starts with the next right move.
That's right. So here's a closing point I think that's good as we wrap this up. He got criticized so badly. I mean, they wanted to kill him. And I think criticism for doing right, I think, can be par for the course. Right? I think we can just expect it. But God will strengthen you, and he'll go with you, and he will use you to make a difference if you have the courage to obey him and follow him. I think that's what the second half of the story is all about.
All right. Well, I look forward to part 2 tomorrow.
Me too. It's going to be fun.
We'll see you then.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us spread the word by liking this episode and sharing it on your social media platforms. Be sure to leave a comment and review, and don't forget to give us 5 stars. When you do, you help us reach even more people who need a daily devotional like HC Daily. If you'd like to hear more from Chris and Jeff, they're both teaching pastors at Heritage Church, located in Southeast Michigan. You can get more of their messages by clicking on the Messages tab at heritagechurch.com. Be sure to join us again soon for another episode of HC Daily.